on Ho Chi Minh, the man who led Vietnam to independence. In this episode, we shall discuss the great Vietnamese revolutionary Ho Chi Minh, who led Vietnam to independence and is regarded as one of the most influential revolutionaries and leaders of the 20th century. He is considered the founding father of modern Vietnam and is a symbol of Vietnamese independence and nationalism. Ho Chi Minh, born as Nguyen Sinh Cung and later known as Nguyen Tat Ton, was a Vietnamese revolutionary and statesman who played a crucial role in the struggle for Vietnamese independence and the founding of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, North Vietnam. Born on May 19, 1890, in Nha Anh Province, Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh became involved in anti-colonial activities at a young age. He traveled widely and lived in different countries, including France, the United States, and the Soviet Union, where he was exposed to various political ideologies and revolutionary movements. Ho Chi Minh became a founding member of the French Communist Party and later established the Indochinese Communist Party, ICP, in 1930. He led the struggle against French colonial rule and the Japanese occupation during World War II. After the Japanese were defeated in 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnam's independence and established the Democratic Republic of Vietnam with himself as its first president. During the First Indochina War, 1946 to 1954, Ho Chi Minh's forces, known as the Viet Minh, fought against French forces to gain independence for Vietnam. The war culminated in the decisive Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, leading to the Geneva Accords, which temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel. Following the division of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh led the communist government in North Vietnam and worked toward reunifying the country under communist rule. The Vietnam War, or Second Indochina War, began in the late 1950s as the Viet Cong, a communist guerrilla force in South Vietnam, fought against the South Vietnamese government and its American allies. Ho Chi Minh's leadership and dedication to the cause of Vietnamese independence made him a revered figure both within Vietnam and among other anti-colonial movements worldwide. He continued to lead North Vietnam until his death on September 2, 1969, in Hanoi. After the Vietnam War ended in 1975, Vietnam was reunified under communist rule, and Ho Chi Minh's legacy became an integral part of the country's history and identity. Today, he is often referred to affectionately as Uncle Ho by the Vietnamese people. The early life of Ho Chi Minh was marked by a series of travels, struggles, and exposure to different cultures and ideologies. Ho Chi Minh was born into a relatively well-off family. His father, Nguyen Sinh Sac, was a Confucian scholar and teacher, while his mother, Hoang Thi Loan, came from a rural background. His family had some level of respect and influence in the local community. Ho Chi Minh received a traditional Confucian education in his early years, which emphasized classical Chinese literature and history. He was known by his birth name Nguyen Sinh Cung during this time. Ho Chi Minh's father, Nguyen Sinh Sac, had a deep sense of patriotism and anti-colonial sentiment. He passed on his nationalist ideals to his son, instilling in him a desire for Vietnam's independence from French colonial rule. In 1911, at the age of 21, Ho Chi Minh left Vietnam on a French cargo ship and began his extensive travels around the world. He worked various jobs in different countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. These travels exposed him to the hardships faced by workers and people under colonial rule, which further fueled his nationalist and anti-colonial sentiments. While living in Paris during the 1920s, Ho Chi Minh became involved in political activism and was influenced by socialist and communist ideologies. He joined the French Communist Party and began to work toward Vietnam's independence from the colonial powers. During his time abroad, he adopted the name Nguyen Tat Ton and later the alias Nguyen Ai Quoc, which means Nguyen the Patriot, to conceal his identity and avoid detection by French authorities. In 1930, Ho Chi Minh founded the Indochinese Communist Party, ICP, which aimed to unite different nationalist and communist factions in the struggle for Vietnamese independence. These early experiences and exposures played a significant role in shaping Ho Chi Minh's worldview and dedication to the cause of Vietnamese independence. Ho Chi Minh first traveled to France in 1911, where he worked various jobs, including as a kitchen helper, a pastry cook, and a seaman. He spent several years in France, absorbing socialist and communist ideas while witnessing the social and economic disparities between the colonizers and the colonized. While in Europe, Ho Chi Minh also spent some time in the United Kingdom, where he continued his observations of colonialism and its impact on different societies. In the early 1920s, Ho Chi Minh traveled to the Soviet Union and attended the Fifth Congress of the Communist International in Moscow. During his time there, he received ideological training and further embraced communist principles. Ho Chi Minh spent time in southern China, which was close to Vietnam geographically and culturally. He sought support from Chinese communists and revolutionaries for the Vietnamese independence movement. Ho Chi Minh lived in Thailand during the 1920s and early 1930s. He worked as a teacher and continued his political activities, building connections with Vietnamese and other Southeast Asian nationalists. Ho Chi Minh is believed to have traveled to the United States in the early 1910s. During this time, he worked as a baker and a kitchen assistant on a steamship, which allowed him to see the stark contrast between the opulence of the ship's passengers and the labor conditions of the workers. While in France, Ho Chi Minh worked with Algerian nationalists who were also struggling against French colonial rule. He drew parallels between the Algerian and Vietnamese anti-colonial movements. Ho Chi Minh visited Singapore in 1930, where he worked on organizing Vietnamese workers and revolutionaries residing there. These travels provided Ho Chi Minh with first-hand experiences of colonial oppression, social inequality, and the different approaches to fighting for independence and social justice. His exposure to various political ideologies and revolutionary movements helped shape his vision for Vietnam's liberation and informed his leadership in the struggle for Vietnamese independence. Ho Chi Minh's political education was a result of various experiences, self-study, and exposure to different ideologies during his extensive travels and interactions with intellectuals and revolutionaries. Ho Chi Minh's father, Nguyen Sinh Sac, instilled in him a sense of patriotism and a desire for Vietnam's independence from French colonial rule. This early exposure to nationalist ideals laid the foundation for his future political activism. In his early years, Ho Chi Minh received a traditional Confucian education, which emphasized classical Chinese literature and history. While this education was primarily based on Confucian values, it also exposed him to historical events and figures that played significant roles in shaping Vietnam's past. During his travels in France, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, Ho Chi Minh came into contact with socialist and communist ideas. He joined the French Communist Party and was influenced by the principles of Marxism-Leninism, which offered an alternative framework for understanding class struggle, imperialism, and colonial oppression. In 1930, Ho Chi Minh founded the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, ICP, to unite various nationalist and communist factions in the struggle for Vietnamese independence. The establishment of the party marked a significant step in his political education as he assumed the role of a revolutionary leader. Ho Chi Minh read extensively on the works of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Vladimir Lenin, and other communist thinkers. He adapted their theories to the specific conditions of Vietnam and Southeast Asia, developing his own brand of communist thought known as Ho Chi Minh thought. Ho Chi Minh's involvement in anti-colonial and revolutionary activities provided him with practical experience in organizing and leading political movements. He learned valuable lessons from these experiences, and they contributed to his growth as a political leader. Ho Chi Minh collaborated with revolutionaries from different countries and nationalist movements, including Chinese communists, Algerian nationalists, and Indian independence leaders. This exposure to various struggles broadened his understanding of global anti-colonial movements. Throughout his political life, Ho Chi Minh demonstrated pragmatism and adaptability in responding to changing circumstances and challenges. He could apply lessons learned from different movements to the unique context of Vietnam's struggle for independence. Ho Chi Minh's political education was a continuous process, and he remained committed to learning and evolving as a leader throughout his life. His ability to blend nationalist aspirations with communist principles and adapt revolutionary theories to the specific conditions of Vietnam played a crucial role in the success of the Vietnamese independence movement. During his travels, Ho Chi Minh engaged in various political activities that laid the groundwork for his later role as a revolutionary leader in Vietnam. While living in France and other countries, Ho Chi Minh established connections with Vietnamese workers and students residing abroad. He organized them into mutual aid societies and political groups to raise awareness about the plight of Vietnamese people under colonial rule. In 1925, Ho Chi Minh co-founded the Revolutionary Youth League, Thanh Nien, in Guangzhou, China. The league aimed to unite young Vietnamese nationalists and communists, promoting anti-colonialism and advocating for political and social reforms in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh was an active writer and journalist during his travels. He contributed articles to various newspapers and magazines, addressing issues of colonialism, imperialism, and social injustice. He used writing as a tool to raise awareness about the situation in Vietnam and advocate for independence. While in various countries, Ho Chi Minh established contacts with other nationalist and communist movements, such as those in China, Algeria, and India. He sought support and collaboration with like-minded revolutionaries to further the cause of Vietnamese independence. Ho Chi Minh attended communist conferences and international gatherings to gain insights into revolutionary strategies and connect with leaders of other anti-colonial movements. His participation in these events allowed him to establish diplomatic and political ties with different organizations. Throughout his travels, Ho Chi Minh continued to be a vocal advocate for Vietnam's independence from French colonial rule. He raised awareness about the situation in Vietnam and sought support from sympathetic individuals and groups. While working as a laborer in different countries, Ho Chi Minh personally experienced the exploitation and hardships faced by workers under colonial rule. These first-hand experiences shaped his understanding of social inequality and fueled his commitment to fighting for the rights of the oppressed. Ho Chi Minh observed and studied the political systems of various countries, such as France, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. These experiences allowed him to understand different forms of governance and gather insights on how to organize an effective revolutionary movement. Ho Chi Minh's political activities during his travels were characterized by his dedication to the cause of Vietnamese independence, his pursuit of knowledge about different ideologies and movements, and his efforts to build alliances with international supporters of anti-colonialism and socialism. After returning to Vietnam in 1941, Ho Chi Minh took on a central role in leading the Vietnamese independence movement and organizing resistance against French colonial rule. In May 1941, Ho Chi Minh founded the Viet Minh, Vietnam Doc Lap Dong Minh Hoi, which stands for the League for the Independence of Vietnam. The Viet Minh was a broad-based nationalist and communist coalition that aimed to unite various groups in the struggle against Japanese occupation during World War II and against French colonial rule after the war. Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh established base areas in remote and mountainous regions of northern Vietnam. These areas served as strongholds for the resistance movement and provided a safe haven for organizing and training fighters. During World War II, Japan occupied Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh and Viet Minh led a campaign of resistance against the Japanese, seeking to liberate Vietnam from both Japanese and French rule. After Japan's surrender in 1945, the Viet Minh took control of Hanoi and declared Vietnamese independence. In 1946, the French, who were determined to regain control of their colonial possessions after the war, initiated a conflict with the Viet Minh. Ho Chi Minh sought negotiations with the French to secure Vietnam's independence peacefully. However, the talks broke down, leading to the First Indochina War, 1946 to 1954. Ho Chi Minh, as the leader of the Viet Minh and the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRV, led the struggle against the French colonial forces during the First Indochina War. The war culminated in the decisive victory of the Viet Minh at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, which led to the Geneva Accords. In 1954, Ho Chi Minh's DRV participated in the Geneva Conference, which aimed to find a solution to the conflict in Indochina. The conference resulted in the temporary division of Vietnam at the 17th parallel, with the North governed by the Communists and the South under a separate government. Following the division of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese government continued to work towards the reunification of the country under communist rule. This led to the Vietnam War, Second Indochina War, as the Viet Cong, National Liberation Front, fought against the South Vietnamese government and its American allies. Ho Chi Minh's return to Vietnam marked the beginning of a new phase in his life as the primary leader of the Vietnamese independence movement. His leadership and determination played a crucial role in shaping the destiny of Vietnam and its eventual reunification under communist rule in 1975. Ho Chi Minh served as the president of North Vietnam from 1945 until his death in 1969. His presidency was marked by significant challenges, including the struggle for independence, the Vietnam War, nation building, and attempts to foster international alliances. After declaring Vietnam's independence in September 1945, Ho Chi Minh faced the challenge of consolidating power and establishing a functioning government in the northern region of Vietnam. He led the communist government in Hanoi and worked to strengthen the position of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRV. Ho Chi Minh's presidency coincided with the First Indochina War against the French colonial forces. He played a central role in leading the Viet Minh's resistance and guiding military strategies during this conflict, which ultimately led to the defeat of the French at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The Geneva Accords in 1954 temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel, with the North governed by the Communists, DRV, and the South under a separate government. Ho Chi Minh's government focused on consolidating control in the North and supporting the communist movement in the South. During his presidency, Ho Chi Minh implemented various nation-building policies in North Vietnam. His government focused on land reform, collectivization of agriculture, and industrialization efforts. The goal was to create a socialist economy and a society based on communist principles. As the Vietnam War escalated in the 1960s, Ho Chi Minh continued to be a key figure in leading the communist forces, North Vietnam and Viet Cong, against the South Vietnamese government and its American allies. He provided strategic guidance and inspiration to the North Vietnamese forces. Ho Chi Minh sought support and recognition for the DRV's independence and communist government from other countries and international organizations. He engaged in diplomatic efforts to gain allies and build relationships with socialist and non-aligned nations. Ho Chi Minh's leadership and image were central to the Vietnamese communist movement. His status as a national hero and father figure of the nation was carefully cultivated through a cult of personality, with his portrait displayed widely across North Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh's presidency was characterized by his unwavering dedication to Vietnamese independence, socialism, and communism. His leadership and vision played a pivotal role in guiding the Vietnamese people through years of conflict and nation building. In his later years, Ho Chi Minh faced numerous health problems, including heart disease and respiratory issues. His health was a cause of concern, and he received medical treatment both in Vietnam and abroad. Despite his declining health, Ho Chi Minh remained actively involved in the leadership of North Vietnam during the Vietnam War, Second Indochina War. He provided strategic guidance to the communist forces, North Vietnam and Viet Cong, and continued to inspire the people with his leadership. As Ho Chi Minh's health deteriorated, his public appearances became less frequent. He appeared in public events and made speeches on special occasions, but he reduced his involvement in day-to-day governance. Ho Chi Minh continued to address international conferences and events, advocating for Vietnam's independence and garnering support from other nations. Ho Chi Minh passed away on September 2, 1969, in Hanoi, Vietnam. His death was a significant loss for the Vietnamese communist movement and the nation as a whole. He was mourned by the Vietnamese people and remains a revered figure in Vietnamese history. After Ho Chi Minh's death, his embalmed body was displayed in a mausoleum in Hanoi, known as the Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum, where it remains to this day. The mausoleum has become a popular destination for both Vietnamese and foreign visitors to pay their respects to the revolutionary leader. Ho Chi Minh's passing did not mark the end of the Vietnam War, which continued for several more years until the fall of Saigon in 1975, when North Vietnam's communist forces reunited the country under their rule. However, his ideas and principles continued to guide the Vietnamese communist government in the years that followed and left a lasting impact on the nation's history and development. Ho Chi Minh's legacy is profound and enduring, both within Vietnam and on the global stage. His impact on the history and development of Vietnam is significant, and his ideas continue to shape the country's identity and political landscape. Ho Chi Minh is considered the founding father of modern Vietnam. He played a central role in leading the Vietnamese independence movement and establishing the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRV, in the northern region. His vision and leadership were instrumental in shaping the nation's struggle for independence and reunification. Ho Chi Minh's name and image have become symbols of Vietnamese independence and nationalism. He is widely regarded as a hero and a patriot who dedicated his life to fighting for Vietnam's liberation from colonial rule and foreign domination. Ho Chi Minh's role as a communist revolutionary leader is also significant. He founded the Indochinese Communist Party, ICP, and later led the communist government in North Vietnam. His ideas, known as Ho Chi Minh thought, combined Marxist-Leninist principles with nationalist aspirations, adapting them to the specific context of Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh's commitment to anti-colonialism and social justice made him a respected figure in global anti-colonial movements. His ideas and leadership inspired other countries and nationalist movements in their struggles for independence and sovereignty. The Vietnam War, also known as the Second Indochina War, had a profound impact on the world and left a lasting legacy. Ho Chi Minh's leadership during the war, along with the resilience and determination of the Vietnamese people, is remembered as a remarkable chapter in the history of armed resistance against a major world power. Ho Chi Minh's ideas and principles remain influential in Vietnamese politics. His legacy is often invoked by the Communist Party of Vietnam, which has governed the unified country since the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. Vietnam's foreign policy continues to be influenced by Ho Chi Minh's legacy of seeking strategic partnerships with various nations, particularly those sharing socialist or anti-imperialist principles. Despite his passing in 1969, Ho Chi Minh's legacy lives on in the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people and continues to shape the nation's identity, political direction, and place in the world. He remains a revered and beloved figure, embodying the spirit of independence, perseverance, and national pride for Vietnam.